Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. As I was saying earlier, we're happy to be here today to talk civil rights compliance with you, and I'm happy to have some of you join us back again who joined us on our January webinar. So Rob and I have had the pleasure of working with CDOT on the Central 70 project over the last 5 years. And over that time, we've really been able to work with Monica and all of the crew at headquarters on really kind of looking at overall programmatic type items as well. And so today we're talking local agency and how to apply those civil rights requirements on the local agency projects, which for the most part are the same, but can be a little different just because of the pass-through monies and so forth. And Robin, who's going to join us a little bit later on the last half of the project of the webinar today, she's going to be talking about LCPtracker. So Robin has been the audit manager on Central 7 directly for the last 5 years. So she's worked with a lot of different contractors over that time and subcontractors, because most everyone's worked on that project. So again, we're happy to be here today and with MTN Resources. So we'll get started, get moving forward. All right. So I'm not sure, I think we were intending to send out the notes for you all to be able to take some notes on the PowerPoint. I'm not sure if that went out. If not, Jesse will be sending that out a little bit later. So, and what we want to talk with you a little bit about today is number one, we want to introduce B2GNow and LCPtracker System. So Monica mentioned that these systems were implemented across all the CDOT projects a couple of years ago, and now they're getting integrated onto local agency projects. So we're going to introduce the systems to you. The next, we're going to define the roles and responsibilities, kind of walk through what you should be doing as the local agency, what the contractor should be doing, what the Region Civil Rights Office is doing, and also what CRBRC is doing at headquarters. And then we're going to overlap the civil rights requirements with those systems. We're not going to talk theoretical today. We're going to give you boots on the ground, step-by-step, things that you need to do to take action to monitor your job. So you're definitely going to walk away with tangible tools, slides you can look back on and help you navigate the systems. You probably aren't going to be an expert by the time you leave today, but the thing is, we're going to give you some other opportunities, share with you some other opportunities for some training coming up that's really going to take a deeper dive. But we are going to leave you with some very, very useful tools today. And then we're also going to share with you some resource tools that are actually all available online at your fingertips, where you can learn more on your own, in addition to the trainings that are being offered. I'm not going to lie, this is a lot of information today. It gets very granular, but again, we wanted to give you something to walk away with, something that you can use in your everyday practice. Okay. And of course, we're always available for you to call us. It doesn't stop just here. We're available. You have our information. We're going to give it to you again at the end of the webinar, and we're here to help you navigate as much as you need. Okay. So stepping back just a little bit, a little history on the tools. I know Monica mentioned this, but in 2016-17, CDOT implemented these two civil rights compliance systems on all the CDOT projects, traditional projects. And then over the last 2 years, CDOT piloted these systems on a couple of different local agency projects and just really had great results. So effective with the lettings after July 1st, 2022, CDOT has decided to implement these systems onto all local agency construction and professional services contracts. And again, that was for all lettings after July 1st, 2022. Now, some of the benefits you're going to see from the systems include enhanced consistency in the monitoring of civil rights compliance. You're going to see across the board great edits that are built into these systems, that they do some of it for you, some of it you still have to do, but it does allow for a consistent platform, and everything looks the same. Secondly, you're going to see increased staff efficiency. So it's going to relieve you of some of the more manually intensive processing you were doing on some of the CDOT forms, and really allow you to focus more on the oversight of the contract requirements. And lastly, they're going to enhance the connection between you, the local agency, and CDOT, which is ultimately going to help us serve you better too. So recognizing what a far reach this implementation was to all the local agencies across Colorado, CDOT got busy and got ready. So to date, they've brought us on board at MTN Resources as their consultant to expand their resources. We've made contact with each of the local agencies. We sent out a survey to really find out what your knowledge base was and what your needs were. We've identified the initial projects that will be impacted. We've been conducting training series in conjunction with some of the trainings being done out of headquarters as well. The systems are being implemented as the projects get started, and next we're on to customer service and helping to answer your questions and make sure that everybody's set up, ready to go. You can see what you need to on the screens and everybody has the appropriate access. Now, I want to talk a little bit about that survey. First of all, thank you so much to everyone who was able to get that back to us. It was super helpful in identifying your knowledge base and where you needed more help and being most successful. I will say, needless to say, we got a lot of questions, and that's okay. Questions are good. It means you're interested in learning. And for some of you, it did create some concern as to whether you'd been doing what you were supposed to, but we're here to answer those questions and get you steered in the right direction moving forward. Because our role is to help you implement the systems on your projects. But part of knowing how to implement the systems is really understanding the underlying requirements that the systems monitor. I did want to also mention to you that we had some questions about the Gmail account that the email blast came from. It is legit. Hopefully we confirmed all of that with you, but keep that in mind because CDOT's going to be using that to send more future blasts out relative to the local agency program. And so if it went in your spam, make sure you get with your IT folks and let them know, hey, this is good to go because it's going to be great information coming out, okay? So what is B2GNow? Well, B2GNow is a web-based electronic system that collects data and tracks subcontractor approval and tiering. It monitors prompt payment reporting, DBE participation for both commitments and payments, and for construction contracts, it also syncs with LCPtracker to set up the subcontract assignments for Davis-Bacon reporting, which is certified payroll in case you didn't know. B2GNow is used for both professional services contracts and construction contracts. Now, LCPtracker is also a web-based electronic system that collects and tracks data for certified payroll reporting and on-the-job training. But the difference is LCPtracker is only used on construction contracts, and the reason why is because the Davis-Bacon Act only applies to those laborers and mechanics on the site of work. So professional services, you don't have that. Now let's take a look at what those civil rights requirements are and why these projects are even subject to them. Well, the local agency program is a federal program, as you know, that's available to help local agencies implement transportation improvement projects. The federal aid dollars are passed down from Federal Highway to CDOT via a stewardship agreement, and from CDOT onto the local agency via the intergovernmental agreement called the IGA. Now, the local agency is responsible for delivering the project, including procurement of a designer or contractor as needed, depending on the type of project, and then maintaining the project upon completion. Federal aid funding requires subrecipient monitoring. Do not forget that term, subrecipient monitoring. That means everybody that the money is flowing down to must be monitored by the upper tier. So just as CDOT is responsible to Federal Highway for delivering the projects in accordance with federal laws and requirements, so is the local agency as a recipient of those funds. And guess what? Those requirements include civil rights. Now, another important aspect of the program is that it is a reimbursement program, which means the local agency must pay expenses incurred, including payments to the contractor, and then in turn request reimbursement from CDOT. So when a payment request is submitted to CDOT, it's like the local agency is saying, hey, everything is in compliance. I've paid everybody. I'm ready to get my money back. So the reimbursement aspect in itself emphasizes the importance of the local agency making sure that all elements are in compliance prior to making payment to the contractor. If the local agency isn't sure if compliance has been achieved, then you need to work with the region to make sure before final amounts are paid out to the contractor, or call us. If you aren't sure, call. We're available to help, okay? Now, project records on local agency projects are required to be maintained for 3 years after the close of the project. And within that 3-year period, the project can still be audited not only by CDOT, but also by our federal partners, such as Federal Highway or even USDOL. And items found to be out of compliance can be required to be brought back into compliance. And that's a lot harder to do years down the road after a job is closed out and you paid your contractor, versus, when it's ready, ongoing, and you haven't paid your contractor out. So it's really important to get it right before you pay out and before you request reimbursement. Now, additionally, at closeout, the local agency must sign and submit an EEO certification acceptance letter. And that letter says, I do hereby certify that all contractor certified payroll documentation has been reviewed and is in compliance. All federally mandated EEO program documentation has been reviewed and is in compliance. And all documentation will be retained for the required length of time in accordance with the IGA. Now, that's a lot to certify to, especially if you're not sure if you got it right. Now, the one good thing about that documentation is that's what B2GNow and LCPtracker is going to help with. It's going to eliminate some of those forms that you got to keep up with, because it's all going to be sitting safely in a system for you. Now, in case you didn't know, CDOT has a local agency project desk reference that really outlines everything you need to know about the program, including civil rights oversight. Now, needless to say, it covers all disciplines, but there are 2 key chapters regarding civil rights that we want to point out to you today. The first is Chapter 6, which is Project Development, Civil Rights, and Labor Compliance. Now, this chapter discusses more of the contract administration aspects of the civil rights requirements. And the second is Chapter 10, Construction, Civil Rights, and Labor Compliance, that really focuses on the construction phase. The very first sentence in Chapter 10 says the local agency shall monitor the contractor's day-to-day conformity to EEO, Title VI, and labor compliance contract requirements. These are the civil rights requirements that we're talking about and that we're going to discuss in further detail today. Now, if you haven't already, I highly encourage you to read the local agency project desk reference or reread it if you've read it again. For those of us who work in Code of Federal Regulations and regulatory requirements, you don't just read something once. You go back constantly and refer to it. So, view this as your Bible for working with your local agency projects and really hone in on those civil rights chapters. So why are civil rights requirements so crucial to your project success? Well, that's because civil rights requirements are attached to the federal funding component of the project, which is the very basis of how a federal aid project is paid for. So it's tied to the funding. Now let's take a look at those specific requirements as they relate to the systems we're talking about today and see what comes under the umbrella of civil rights contract compliance requirements. What are we referring to when we call them civil rights compliance requirements? So the LCPtracker system is going to cover Davis-Bacon and related acts, which is the certified payrolls, on-the-job training, and equal employment opportunity. The B2GNow system is going to cover subcontractor and supplier requirements, as well as the disadvantaged business enterprise and prompt payment. Now, the project desk reference also does a great job of laying out the roles and responsibilities that each party holds. So we wanted to kind of summarize that for you before we get going, because as we start drilling into these requirements, we're going to be talking about who does what, who submits what, when do they submit it. Now, the contractor is responsible for compliance with all of the civil rights requirements. And the project desk reference specifically says that. It also says that the local agency is responsible for monitoring the contractor's day-to-day conformity with those requirements. The region's civil rights office monitors the contractor and the local agency for compliance. And then the Civil Rights Business Resource Center at headquarters is ultimately responsible for the overall performance and quality of the program itself. Now, on the next slides, we've broken down each compliance requirement into the monitoring actions. I told you we were going to get a little granular today, but again, we want you to walk away with some tangible steps that you can put into practice to start monitoring compliance. We know it's detailed, but it's great information to refer back to. So on these slides, we're giving you an outline with the high points, and then we'll be drilling down and looking at each action step a little bit more. For subcontractor and supplier requirements, the key areas are making sure that the subcontracts are in place for all subs, including all lower tiers, and that those subcontracts contain all the required provisions. Additionally, all subcontractors and suppliers are required to have CDOT approval to work on the project, and we're going to talk about how that happens. For the DBE program, we'll be addressing contract goals, the DBE utilization plan, DBE commitments and payments, DBE plan modifications if needed, and CUFs. So the Region Civil Rights Office sets the DBE contract goals, and the contractor formalizes its commitment to meeting that goal in the DBE utilization plan and the supporting DBE commitments. Now, previously, Form 1419 was used by the contractor to document their DBE utilization plan, but now that is all submitted through B2G. Then the contractor's individual commitments, the Form 1415s, they still fill out the 1415, but these are also then uploaded into B2G at the same time as the utilization plan to support that overall commitment. Payments made to DBEs as well as non-DBEs, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more, are reported also in the B2G system. And should the contractor not meet their utilization plan, Form 1420 is used to request a DBE plan modification and also to document the contractor's good faith efforts as to why it couldn't be met. By regulation, each DBE must perform a commercially useful function. We often refer to this as CUF, commercially useful function. And CUF is documented and evidenced on Form 1432 and uploaded into B2G. Did you know that the CFR 49 CFR Part 26 actually requires specific documentation of a CUF? So we're going to talk about how that's done. For prompt payment, we'll look at CDOT's requirement to pay lower tier subs within 7 days after being paid, and also how those payments are reported. So prompt payment requirements are embedded in the DBE regulations, but don't be mistaken, because prompt payment again applies to everybody, DBE and non-DBE. So it's a little confusing when you see it's embedded in the DBE program regulations, but yet it applies to everybody. It also ensures that subs are promptly paid upon satisfactory performance of their contracts. Now, CDOT requires that subs are paid within 7 days after payment is made by the upper tier contractor. And prompt payment is reported within B2G by the upper contracting tier, and then the lower tier subcontractors have an opportunity to confirm those payments. Prompt payment is reported every month. For the Davis-Bacon Act requirements, we'll look at certified payrolls, requests for additional wage classifications, and also labor interviews. So contractors that perform work on Davis-Bacon Act covered projects must pay wages in accordance with USGOL prevailing wage decisions. We're going to take a look at those. To evidence compliance, the contractors submit certified weekly payrolls into the LCPtracker system. Now, previously, you were probably getting a PDF, might have come over email. You might have even gotten hard copies of certified payrolls, but no more. Those are going to be coming through the LCPtracker system. You're going to love it. In the case that an additional wage classification is needed, Form 1444 is still utilized by the contractor to make that request to CDOT. And then CDOT in turn processes it and sends it on to USGOL, who will make a determination on conformance. Additionally, as a part of the oversight of monitoring these acts, the local agency will be conducting labor interviews. This is the Form 280. in which workers are interviewed in the field and then spot check the information that's being reported by the contractor that's coming in on those certified payrolls. Are they actually reporting the appropriate classification, which then establishes the base in which the worker should be paid? Now, interviews are confidential, and they're also housed in LCPtracker. CDOT has set up a confidential cabinet in which the contractor cannot actually access within the system. Now, OJT, well, the whole objective of the program is to train and upgrade minorities, women, and disadvantaged persons toward a journeyman level status. So within OJT will look at the goal itself, the contractor's commitment to the goal, how trainees are enrolled, and how training is documented and reported towards achievement of the overall OJT goal. So the OJT goal is set at the region office, and the contractor's commitment to meet the goal is outlined in Form 1337 and submitted into LCPtracker. See, I know these forms left and right, and I still get tongue-tied on calling them out. So Form 1337 is where the contractor is going to make their commitment to that OJT goal. Then the OJT trainees are requested by the contractor for enrollment and approved by CDOT with the submission of Form 838. Then monthly, as training is ongoing, at the end of the month, the training hours for each trainee are reported on Form 832 for CDOT review and approval. Upon approval, those hours are then counted towards the project's OJT goal, and approved form is uploaded into the LCPtracker system. So you can see how not only do the systems facilitate a lot of the reporting, but they also house a lot of the documentation for you, which is awesome. It's all in one place. That makes audits a breeze. And for EEO requirements, the contractor is required to install a job site bulletin board to comply with, and also comply with July reporting. And a contractor may be subject to contractor compliance reviews. So FHWA 1273 includes requirements that apply to a company's commitment to EEO and affirmative action. This includes establishment of a job site bulletin board at the project site with posters that explains the workers' rights. And we're going to give you an example of a board and what all should be on it. Additionally, July reporting provides a survey nationwide of construction workers that are on the job sites in July. Now, why do they pick July? Well, because nationwide, typically July is a good weather month across all the states, and construction is going on. The July reports are generated in LCPtracker from the certified payrolls. However, that only reports the craft laborers. The contractors then have to complete the report with non-craft workers that are not already being reported into LCPtracker. So once they've done that, they'll then verify and sign the July report, and then that data is housed within the LCPtracker system, and CRBRC can then pull the data from the system and roll up into a statewide report. So contractors are also required to implement an EEO affirmative action plan within their company, which again may be subject to contractor compliance review by the region office. If a contractor on one of your projects are selected, you will definitely be notified. And this is a review that's done by region's office. Okay. So now I want to take a deeper dive into B2GNow and give you an overview. We're going to show you what the dashboards look like, so you're familiar with them. Just really remove the mysteries of B2GNow and all the unknowns you have, because I think that that's half the battle with any type of new change, or it's just getting comfortable with what you can expect to see. So we're going to start with that, and then we are going to drill in a little deeper dive and show you some specific actions that you should be selecting as far as your oversight monitoring duties at the local agency. Now, in order for the project to be properly set up in B2G and LCPtracker, the local agency must complete the LAP setup information form. There is a separate form for construction projects and professional services projects. Both forms are discussed and included in the local agency project desk reference, but we've recently been able to now have that all available online. So In addition to the basic project information, the form also asks for information regarding the person who at the local agency will be, number one, recommending approval to sublet work, and number two, accepting and rejecting payrolls in LCPtracker. And the reason why is because when the project is getting set up, we have to actually choose a person's name who's going to get all the notices, who's going to actually go in and click those buttons, who's going to recommend approval for a contractor, who's going to accept payrolls, who can look at audit discrepancies. Now, if you notice, these are some of the very questions we were asking you on the survey in regards to who the responsible persons for civil rights are at your local agency. I think it did make some of you a little uncomfortable because maybe you tag teamed some of it, but each person that is responsible has a login into the LCPtracker and B2GNow systems, okay? So we wanted to get you thinking in that direction because at some point you have to write a name down on that form, or in this case, plug it in online. Now, when the lab setup form is submitted to CRBRC, it'll get set up with responsible person B2G, and then you're going to receive an email with your login information, which is the username and password. Typically, the username is your email. Now, once you've been set up for the first time, any additional projects that you're working on will then be added to that same user profile moving forward. So you just have one login user profile in B2G. Now, on the login screen, you'll enter your login information. From the same page, if you need to, you can troubleshoot your account if in the future you forgot or misplaced your username or password. You can also do an account lookup. Yeah, I don't think I had that on these slides, but down below this area, there's a whole area that says account lookup or forgot your password and so forth. So it does prompt you all right there on the screen. So once you get that information loaded in, you're in. And this is generally what the dashboard looks like. The system dashboard provides a summary of the contracts you're assigned to, and it can be customized to your layout preference. This is just what this one looks like. For the most part, this is actually what mine looks like too. Now, the view we're in here is for the oversight role, which is also the role of the local agency. The contractor's dashboard looks different than this, okay? Now, over on the left-hand side is the navigation menu. And in the contract section, it tells you how many contracts you are assigned within the system. By clicking on the blue contracts wording, you can then flag the contracts you want to see on your dashboard when you log in down under the priority flagged contracts. That's this area right here. We're going to talk about a little bit more, okay? And this really will give you a quick overview of the DBE goals and achievements for each contract. Now, contract audit section is the section that really gives you your to-do list. It tells you what your pending actions are. So it's your go-to area. To navigate the details of a specific contract, you would click on that contract and then drill down further into the contract itself. But really, contracts audits is going to get you your immediate actions that you need to take care of. Now, once you're within a contract, a new navigation header can be seen at the top of the screen. So just to reiterate, to get to this next slide, we actually clicked on a contract, okay? So we wanted more detailed information about that contract. And then this is where we are. And so once you're within the contract again, this new navigation header can be seen up at the top of the screen. And this is really where you're going to move around from there. So clicking on subs at the top will then let you view a subcontractor tiering list for the whole contract. The 1 represents a first tier sub to the prime contractor. And then the 2 represents a second tier sub and so forth. If you had in this case, if MMM Group, who's a second tier, had subs underneath it, then you're going to see a 3rd layer with a 3 out beside it. And then within each tiering, the subs are maintained in alphabetical order. And I'll give you a quick little tip here. You know, due to the size, the typical size of a local agency project, you really may not have a lot of subcontractor tiering on your project. I have a project that has almost 700. So when I go to my subs listing, it's a little overwhelming to find things I need or to find the particular sub. In fact, they might even be tiered multiple times underneath a really large project. So just a reminder that Control F will throw a search function into the top of your screen, and you can type in a sub's name or word. And you're going to see a little bit later when we're looking up subcontractors that maybe haven't reported, how awesome that can be to find the information you need really fast. So Control F. Okay. Now, each subcontractor line provides key information about that sub. Starting from the left-hand side of the subcontractor line, the subcontractor tiering number, which we talked about, and then the name of the sub is displayed. Moving across that line, from the left, certified, right here, indicates the sub's DBE and or ESB certification status. And then we've got the current award amount. Now, you'll see that it all has original and current. Original, there are times that a subcontract amount may change, right? And so they may add more money to it and so forth. If so, it'll always tell you what the original amount was and then what the current amount is. And then from there, we have the supplier or the type of subcontracting relationship. That could be subcontractor, supplier, trucking, manufacturer, or regular dealer. And then we also have whether it's included in the goal or not. A no indicates that the sub is not a DBE and is not included in the goal. Whereas here for the first one, A1 Trucking, they're a DBE and they've been included. Now, the compliance audit column confirms that the sub has been included in compliance audits, and we'll talk more about compliance audits, which is the B2G term for prompt payment audits. And all subs must be included in monthly compliance audits, prompt payment audits. And because prompt payment applies to all subs, DBE and non-DBE. We're going to have a question on that later, so make sure you remember that, okay? And final payment indicates that the final payment has been reported by the upper tier and confirmed by the sub. This means that the 205 work, the 205 is the form that they're going to request for a sub to be approved on, is completed and that the final retainage has been released to that sub. Now, in the Documents tab, you can add and view all documents such as the DB utilization plan, sublet request, supplier list, DB commitments, utilization plan modifications, or cut. Now, when an initial subcontractor or supplier request comes over, it's going to have a place where that Form 205 or 1425 is attached, and you're going to look at it at that point in time before you approve them. But once it's been approved, you can also see those attachments in this area as well. The compliance audit list. Remember, compliance audit is equivalent to your prompt payment audits in B2GNow, and that's done monthly. Prompt payment requirement requires reporting by each upper tier prime for payments made to the lower tier sub. And each month that is referred to as an audit period within B2G. So here you can view a list of the audit period, status, amount paid to the prime for each of your monthly audits on the contract. And again, we're going to do a deeper dive and a little bit more about prompt payment and the required monthly reporting here shortly. In the compliance audit summary for total contract, you can review the ongoing progress towards contract completion and the DBE goal. So progress towards the goal is tracked by payments, not commitments. Remember, a commitment is just saying, hey, we're committed to utilizing this DB sub for this amount of money, but they've still got to actually use them and they still got to actually pay them, okay? So progress towards the goal is tracked by payments, not commitments. Now on this contract, the DBE goal is 12%. And this table here is showing you that there are 140 DB subs participating on the contract, of which 118 have received payments to date that are counting towards the goal. The percentage achieved to date is 18%, which is 6% above the goal. And at the bottom of the chart, you can see that the contract is 70% complete and that they've already exceeded the goal and have achieved 100%, 106% of the 12% goal. Now, to put in perspective, this particular job has about a year left on it, so that's why they're at 70%, okay? So now that we toured the system, you kind of have a visual of what it looks like. Let's overlap the local agency responsibilities within the B2G system, okay? Show you what you need to actually do with all of these buttons. We're going to look at subcontractor and supplier requirements first, and we're going to look at the subcontracts and also subcontractor approvals. To be very clear, no work can be done on the project by the prime or any sub without an executed agreement. And B2G is where subcontractor requests are submitted to CDOT for approval once a subcontract is in place so that work can begin. So when that upper tier or the prime submits a subcontractor request for any of its lower tiers, they're saying, hey, we'd like to utilize this sub on the job, and we have an executed agreement in place that contains all the required provisions. That's the assertion they're making when they submit that request over and attach the 205 or the 1425. Once the subcontract is in place and that work can begin, the request can come over. And I'd like to again reiterate that an executed agreement must be in place for all subs and suppliers working on the project, because everything starts with a contract, right? That tells you can get started, it tells you what you're supposed to be doing, what you're going to get paid. All subs must have an executed agreement. And federal provisions go in all subcontracts, not just the prime's contract. And if they are in there, the subcontract must be amended and corrected and included to house all of those requirements and provisions. Now, in the local agency project desk reference, the specifications review checklist includes the key civil rights provisions that must be included, such as FHWA 1273, prevailing wage decisions, as well as the CDOT DBE, OJT, and prompt payment specs. So it's right there. It's telling you what you should be looking for, okay? And FHWA 1273 specifically says that no portion of the contract shall be sublet without the written consent of the contracting agency. Now, the contracting agency is CDOT, okay? They're the ones that got the money. And what that means then is when they make that request into B2GNow, and you're going to see that you at the local agency are going to recommend approval, and then CDOT actually approves it. That documents CDOT's approval for compliance with this provision, that they have consented to allow that sub onto the job. Now, while Form 205 is utilized for subcontractors, Form 1425 is required to be submitted along with a B2 request for suppliers over $10,000. And only the prime contractor can submit a request with a Form 205 or 1425 attached. Requests submitted by a sub should be rejected in B2G. Unfortunately, the system does not serve as a gatekeeper as to who can submit that request, but we need any request made by a sub to be rejected and denied and returned. Only a prime contractor request should be considered for approval. As I mentioned before, the approval process in B2G has two parts. It requires a recommendation of approval, which is done by the local agency, and then a final approval, which is done by CDOT. And while prime sub can sublet their work, prime contractors are required to perform at least 30% of the work with their own labor forces. When a sub request is submitted, the local agency designated person who's going to provide that approval and get the notice will receive an email notification that, hey, there's some requests pending that you need to go take a look at to recommend approval. Additionally, on their dashboard, there will be an indicator. So you'll get an email, but there's also going to be an indicator on the dashboard. Remember in this contract audit section that we talked about that says, hey, there's pending sub requests. So this is your to-do list. This requires action by you. In this example, there are two pending sub requests. Now from the contracts audits in this dashboard area, you can select the red number in the sub request right here on this line. All you got to do is click that, and then the list of the pending subcontractor request will pop up. Now, in this example, you can see that a recommendation for approval has not been completed yet. But if it had, then you'd see the name of the person who recommended approval. I say you'll see. Actually, you'll see it on your dashboard as the person recommending approval, but also this is what the CDOT person would see, that it's still pending recommendation. Now, when you're recommending approval, there's some things you need to take a look at too before you push it on to CDOT. And the main items you want to verify are the name of the sub, the tier, the subcontract amount, and also was the former 1425 attached. If it wasn't, right there, you're going to return it. But you could also have a situation where the dollar amounts that are in the Form 205 don't agree with the dollar amounts on the screen for the request. I've had that happen many a time. Or maybe they just outright attach the wrong 205 or 1425. So you got to ask yourself, was the information on the attachment the same as in the system? And then again, who submitted the request? If anyone other than the prime submitted it, then the request should be denied. So you're looking to make sure everything on the 205 is accurate. The right sub, was the right WBS element included? Was the dollar amounts right? Now, that being said, you have a couple of options. You can approve the request. You can deny the request. If something's blatantly wrong, you should deny it. But if it's as simple as maybe they didn't attach the Form 205 or 1425, but everything else looked good, you could just return it for update. They'll attach it and resubmit it. Or maybe if they attach the wrong form, right? So those are some options. So when you click Approve Request, the system is going to tell you that you do not have the authority to actually approve the request. However, you're going to click OK to save your response as a recommendation. Then once you've recommended approval at the local agency, it's going to move into the court of CDOT region, Civil Rights Compliance Specialist. Now, unfortunately, when you recommend approval, the system does not shoot the CDOT region Civil Rights Specialist an email that says, hey, approval's been recommended. So if it's really something that you need to get moved on, I highly recommend that you send an email to the Civil Rights Specialist, let them know that you've recommended approval to put it at the top of their list and on their radar. Otherwise, you're subject to next time when they're checking their approvals that need to be processed. So keep that in mind if you're needing to push something a little bit faster along. Now, again, if you feel there are any issues with the request, you can always choose deny request, but you could return it for update if you feel like it's minor corrections. Do highly recommend that you provide a detailed response as to what the issue is, whether you're returning it for update or denying the request, so that they can make the appropriate corrections or know why it was submitted. It also keeps a history of that within the system itself for reference in the future. Okay, so let's talk DBE. Again, we're going to be looking at the DBE goal, the utilization plan, commitments and payments, modification requests if needed, and CUF. Now, we already said the Region Civil Rights Office will be setting the DBE goal for the project. And just so that you understand what that DBE goal consists of, it's calculated by dividing the total dollar value of work that is anticipated to be performed by DBE firms by the total dollar value of the contract. For example, if the total work to be performed by DBE firms is $500,000 and the total contract is $5 million, then the DBE goal is 10% for the contract. And when setting that goal, the Region Civil Rights Office is working with the engineering community to say, hey, what work's actually going to be done on this project? And then they're drilling in to look at what DBEs are certified in those types of scopes of work. What's the availability? Because you got to have ready, willing, and able DBEs to actually perform the work, okay? So those are some of the thoughts behind going into setting the DBE goal. And if you have any questions, you can always call the region office if you've got any questions as to how the DBE goal is set and what scopes of work were taken into consideration, okay? Now, upon award, the prime contractor shall upload its DBE utilization plan within B2G, which is a detailed listing of the DBE firms that the prime intends to commit to in order to achieve the DBE goal that's been set. The individual DBE commitments are reported on Form 1415, which is also uploaded to support each commitment that's been included in the utilization plan. Form 1415 is signed by both the Prime and the DBE and is approved by the Region Civil Rights Office. Again, both documents can be found in the Documents tab in B2G. We showed you that earlier. So a contractor can't just decide to not use a DBE firm that was previously committed to without a valid reason, such as maybe the DBE firm went out of business, or the DBE can no longer perform the services for whatever reason. But the reason, the communication with the DBE firm, and the good faith efforts to substitute the DBE firm with another DBE must all be documented within Form 1420 and communicated to CDOT. Failure to carry out this communication requirement and document it with both the DBE and CDOT is a material breach of the contract by the prime contractor. Now, granted, the 1420 should be submitted to the local agency, who in turn submits it to the Region Civil Rights Office. And upon approval of the form, it'll be uploaded into B2G and can be viewed again in the Documents tab. And while it is the contractor, the prime contractor's responsibility to document this communication when this happens, obviously it's important for you at the local agency to know that it is a requirement. And if you see some changes with DBEs or you didn't get it, you have a responsibility to request it, okay? So it's important everybody understanding and knowing what the requirements are, so we as a whole can make the project successful and keep it in compliance. So let's talk CUF. Now, CUF stands for Commercially Useful Function. I'm sure you've heard of it, but just in case not, CUF, Commercially Useful Function. And this is the term utilized to evaluate whether a DBE firm controls all components of its business and is directly responsible for the execution of the work they are contracted to perform. Now, the Code of Federal Regulation, 49 CFR Part 26.55 says, number one, all DBEs must perform a commercially useful function. It is the law, and it is required in order for that DBE participation to be counted towards the goal. Next, it says that DBEs must perform at least 30% of the total cost of its contract with its own workforce. We're going to talk about if they sub out to lower tier DBEs or non-DBEs, and that's how that impacts the goal. But even to count the 30% of the work that they've performed, they must perform at least 30% of their contract. Thirdly, one CUP must be completed for each DBE contract. That's the Form 1432. And lastly, each CUP must be documented and retained on file. So to comply with this requirement to document, CDOT has established Form 1432 and requires that for construction services, the CUF must be completed within 10 calendar days of the DBE commencing work. And for services off the site of work, such as professional services, the CUF must be completed no later than within 30 to 50% of the DBE's completion of the work. So why is it not okay to just complete the 1432 at the end of the job after the DBE is done? Well, a couple of issues with that. For one, what if the DBE didn't achieve a CUF? They're already off the job. There's no way to investigate the work they're being done. And secondly, if you don't find out that CUF wasn't achieved till the end of the job, there's no opportunity for the prime contractor to look for other DBEs to try to achieve the goal. So from a timing standpoint, it's important that CUFs are conducted and documented more towards the beginning of the project so that there's time to respond, investigate as needed, and to react to the situation. Now on the CUF form itself, let's take a look at what it's asking. Section 2 is completed and signed by the DBE. And I want to clarify that the CUF is initiated by the prime contractor. It's not to say that you, the local agency, if you're having weekly, biweekly, or monthly meetings with your prime contractor, you might not be waiting to, or you might not go over like, okay, what CUFs do we need to get moving along? So there's a coordination aspect, but the prime contractor initiates it. And section 2 is completed and signed by the DBE and asks them a series of questions to determine if the CUF was actually performed. So let's take a look at those. Do you have an executed written agreement for this project? Remember, all subs must have an executed agreement, including DBEs. They've got to know what they were subcontracted to do, what they're planned to be paid to do that work. And also you've got to make sure that it's the work they're being performing is within the NAICS code in which they're certified. The next question is what work did you perform on this project? So this information is then compared to the subcontract to determine if the work they actually performed, that they're saying they performed, matches the contracted scope of work. And again, the work performed must be within the NAICS code in which the DB firm is certified. Did your firm subcontract out any portion of its work? Well, remember that for DB participation to be counted towards the goal, the DB must perform at least 30% of the work. And the contractual relationship and work performed should be reviewed in B2G to determine the DB did in fact perform at least 30% of the work. So what that means is if a DBE subcontracted out to a non-DBE, then the portion of the work performed by a non-DBE can't be counted, only that of the DBE, and assuming that the DBE did at least 30% of the work. Now, if the work subbed out was to another DBE, then those same requirements apply to that lower tier DBE as well to determine that work can properly be accounted. Now, the great thing about B2G is, guess what? It's going to look at those subcontractor tiering relationships, and it's going to take a look at who's DBE and who's not DBE and automatically calculate those participation dollars for you, okay? And the next question is, did the firm lease any employees or lease or rent any equipment to perform the work? So a DB firm can lease employees to facilitate their work, and that can still count. It's also asking, did they lease any equipment? Now, if they're leasing employees or equipment, it must be documented. And it can't be from the prime contractor. If those leases occur with the prime contractor, then those dollars are not eligible and would have to be removed from those payments, okay, for purposes of calculating the participation. Next is, did the DB firm supply any materials to another firm? So if materials were supplied, then documentation should be obtained to evidence the relationship and determine the DB firm's role as manufacturer or regular dealer, which also impacts the percentage of the DB's work that can be counted, 60% versus 100%. So once the DBE completes section 2, then section 3 is completed by the prime contractor within 10 days of receipt from the DBE. Once completed, the contractor submits the form to the local agency engineer. And in this section, the contractor is asked, if the DBE statements are true and correct, was the work performed consistent with the DBE commitment and the sublet request? And did the prime contractor assist the DBE in any way during the project, such as negotiation, payroll, employees, or equipment? The purpose of this question is to determine if the DBE performed a CUF, which means were they responsible and in control of their own work and with their own workforce? Section 4 is then completed and signed by the local agency engineer. Here, the engineer must make the determination of whether CUF was performed or not. Section 5 of the form provides further guidance that the engineer can use to determine if a CUF was performed to answer that question. Because again, at this point, you've gotten information from the prime contractor and the DBE, but now you need a comfort zone in making sure that that's accurate. You might take a look at the executed agreement. You might request an invoice, you might request material delivery tickets, and so forth. There's a lot of recommendations as to what can help you identify that a CUF was actually achieved. And for those contractors actually on work on the project, it could also be a visual awareness and observation that they actually conducted the work. So if the local agency determines that a CUF was not performed, then they should contact the Region Civil Rights Office immediately. If a CUF was performed, then the completed CUF along with any supporting documentation obtained, should be uploaded into B2G under the Documents tab. And again, if you have any questions when completing that section 4, you need to reach out to your Region Civil Rights Office, or again, you can reach out to our group, okay? All right, prompt payment. Well, again, I want to reiterate that don't be fooled by prompt payment requirements being embedded in the DBE Code of Federal Regulation, because prompt payment rule applies to all subcontractors, both DBE and non-DBE subs, okay? And Colorado state law has a more restrictive rule actually than the DBE regulation. DBE regulation requires prompt payment within 30 days. Colorado state law requires contractors to pay within 7 days of being paid from the upper tier, and then payments are reported in B2G monthly, even if there are 0 payments. So whether you paid them, they were paid $100,000, $50,000, or $0, a payment must be reported in B2G monthly. And the local agency is responsible for ensuring that the prime contractor is in compliance with prompt payment requirements. Now in B2G, the act of monitoring prompt payment reporting is called monthly compliance audits. We've said this a couple of times. That's what B2G calls it. And when monitoring prompt payment, there are 2 key deadlines you need to be aware of. Number 1 is the reporting of the payments themselves. Every prime and subprime on the project must report how much it paid its direct subcontractors by the 15th of each month. This monthly reporting is required even if the sub was paid $0. The prime must ensure also that its middle tier subs are reporting. Reporting is a requirement and a condition of payment. So what that means is that in this example, for the month of December, they have until January 15th to report any payments they made during the month of December. Now, once those payments have been reported, the lower tier sub has an opportunity to confirm payments. So after the primes have reported, the subs have 15 days to respond. There are then 3 primary actions associated with monitoring the monthly audits. The first is reviewing past due audits. So this is where the prime or the upper tier subprime has not reported payments to lower tier subs by the 15th day of the month. Because remember, reporting is a requirement. It is a contract requirement. The next action is closing incomplete audits. This is where the sub has not confirmed the payment within 15 days after the prime or subprime reported. Now, verifying payments by the sub is not a requirement, but reporting payments by the upper tier prime is. And then we have reviewing and resolving discrepancies. This is when the prime or the subprime and the sub do not agree on the amounts that were paid, that were reported. So let's look at each of these a little bit closer and show you how you tangibly see what's going on at any point in time with the contracts. So reviewing past due audits. From the contract audits in your dashboard, remember that's your to-do list box right there. Select the red number in the past due audits line. So this is saying that we've got 28 past due audits. Now in the list that comes up, you're going to see a little drop-down box that comes up. You can use the drop-down menus to filter the audits. You can filter by prime past due status to find only the late audits. And past due audits should be reviewed on the 16th of the following month because remember the primes have 15 days to report payments, right? So come day 16, they should all be reported, but they may not be. And if they aren't, this is where you're going to see that. So for example, for the November audit, past due audits should be reviewed on December 16th to identify which primes have not been reported. Now, then you can click the blue underlined hyperlink for the audit period to enter the actual audit. Now, when you do that, when you enter the actual audit, the screen is going to pull up the entire list, your entire subcontractor tiering list. So we just extracted one here as an example to show you that for any line that has not been reported, it's going to be in red, not reported. But this is just one line. Your entire subcontractor tiering list is going to show up. And this is where that quick little tool I told you about, Control F, to quickly go to not reported. Hit Control F, type in not reported. It's going to quickly go to those for you, especially if you've got a lot of subcontractor tiering. So the box number on the left side of the screen will indicate the tier of the sub whose information has not been reported. And again, the prime is ultimately responsible for ensuring all monthly payments are reported, either by themselves or by their first tier, lower tier subs. And during the 15-day reporting period, you can also filter over here by pending prime, which will tell you how many primes have not reported. So, you can check in between day 1 and day 15, like how you're progressing on your contract. So now let's discuss how to close incomplete audits. So an incomplete audit is an audit that the sub has not responded to. Because again, I can't stress enough that reporting is a contract requirement. Responding by the lower tier to verify is not a contract requirement. It is highly recommended. And if you ever have a sub ask, why should I go in and verify? Well, they need to understand that that is a function there to protect their rights. It's our mechanism for giving them the opportunity to express their concerns if they haven't been paid properly, and to ensure that prompt payment reporting is happening, it's taking place. So it's their way of advocating for themselves and to ensure that they're getting paid properly. So again, per the specs, which as we know has been included in the subcontract, the subcontractors get 15 days to respond to reports from their higher tiers. And after 15 days, we can close the audits. And again, subs are not required to confirm the payments, but they really should. Because if the sub or supplier does not report a prompt payment issue within 15 days from the contractor's monthly reporting, the subcontractor waives CDOT's assistance in resolving the prompt payment issue, and the monthly audit will be closed. So to begin reviewing incomplete audits from the contract audits on your dashboard, select the red number in the incomplete audits line, okay? Then filter by pending sub status to find subs that have not confirmed payment within the 15-day allotted time. And you can also filter by pending all, which will show you like all the statuses of what's going on. And if you have multiple contracts, it'll all be in this same list right here. So before you close an audit, you'll want to ensure that all incomplete records have been open for at least 15 days. So what does that mean? So again, reporting is a requirement. Unfortunately, all primes may not report on time. So if you have a prime that's reporting late, at the point that they report, the sub still has 15 days to verify. So it could be that that upper tier prime didn't report on time. They didn't report till the 20th, right? So therefore, you still have to leave that audit open for 15 more days in order for that sub to have the opportunity to verify. So under the not yet status, so when you go and look at your subcontractor tiering list, the ones that have not reported or verified the payments yet will have not yet. And again, this is just one line of a whole subcontractor tiering. And then on the bottom, under the contract status, not yet status, select view. And then what's going to happen is you're going to pull up, and on the left-hand side, it's going to show you the response date. So you got to make sure that whatever day you're checking this, that the sub has had at least 15 days after the response date by the prime in order to verify. Now, after you reviewed all incomplete lines, once all the lines are reported more than 16 days earlier, then you can select the big tab at the bottom to mark unconfirmed sub entries as confirmed, and that will close the whole audit at once. If you try to close individual lines on their own, you're going to be required to indicate what the actual payments were, and you actually may not have that information. Okay, you could contact the sub to get that. If any line was reported less than 16 days earlier, do not close the audit. All subs must have 15 days to respond to report according to the contract, even if the prime reports the payment late. Now, again, this process only applies to incomplete responses. There is no equivalent process for incomplete reporting by primes. It is a condition of payment. So now on to discrepancies. So discrepancies happen for one of two reasons. Either one party made a reporting error or the lower tier sub is trying to notify CDOT of a payment issue. And the discrepancy is the way in which a subcontractor can ask for CDOT's help in resolving a payment issue or potential prompt payment violation. These discrepancies should therefore be taken very seriously. And keep in mind, if at any point the two contractors come to an agreement on the discrepancy, then the record is no longer considered discrepant, okay? And as the project engineer, your role in this process is really twofold. First, your job is to ensure the subcontractor's issue is acknowledged. Second, your job is to ensure that the B2G system stays as accurate as possible and clearly documents the steps that you took to investigate and any information obtained to resolve the discrepancy. So to review discrepancies, again, we're going back to our to-do list, and on the line for discrepancies, we're going to click the red number in the discrepancies line. Then you can filter by discrepancy to find the audits that have outstanding discrepancies. Then click the blue underlined audit period to enter into that audit. Again, you're going to get the whole list of your subs, and you want to find the ones that have discrepancy out to the side. You can hit Control F, type in discrepancy, it'll take you straight to them. Super easy. Now, you've got to hit the resolve button in order to drill in and to see what the prime said, what the sub said, what really is the discrepancy. So don't be alarmed by the fact that you've got to hit the resolve button. You've got to hit a bunch more buttons to actually resolve it, but that is the step you have to take in order to go look at what's going on a little bit closer. So to move forward in resolving discrepancy, at the top of the screen, you're going to select Resolve Discrepancy. So again, you've hit the resolve button, you're in it, you're looking at what everybody said is the issue. You do have the right to call the prime and or the sub directly if you need more information, but you really should review their responses. And again, you're totally within your rights to contact them for more information. So when resolving, you'll be asked to select the option that shows the dollar amount that was actually released to the sub. So once you've figured out what the case situation is, what their correct amount is, you're going to have to actually answer this. You can enter into public comments. There's also an area for private comments to indicate how and why you resolve the discrepancy. You can also upload and attach any relevant documents that you may receive while investigating, such as emails, invoices, canceled checks. Then ultimately, you're going to hit Save Response, okay? Robin's going to step in and talk to you about LCPtracker, and then we've got all kinds of great information to share with you about upcoming training. So we're super happy to have you with us today talking civil rights, and hope you're really getting something out of this, okay? Thank you.
Compliance manager on Central 70, and I've been working on that project for 5 years. So we're going to start getting into some overview of LCPtracker. So now that we're all experts on B2G, let's get started. So LCPtracker is used to monitor prevailing wage requirements and on-the-job training. Just a reminder that the requirements monitored in LCP apply to construction contracts only, versus the B2G system that applies to both construction and professional services contracts. To log in to LCPtracker, you're going to go to www.lcptracker.net, enter your username and a temporary password to log in for the first time, and then you'll be prompted to change your password. Here you see the LCPtracker main dashboard. This is the project oversight view, which is different from the contractor view. Across the top center, there are options that access training materials, support, of course, where you can log out, but also where you can have a live chat with an LCPtracker rep if needed. Under training materials, there's a huge selection of trainings that can be accessed within the system itself. The support tab has options for email, phone support, and also LCPtracker can view your screen for a more direct assistance and guidance. The main menu is located at the top left corner of the screen and consists of options for projects, certifications, violations, reports, admin, eDocs, and setup. Admin and setup are used by CDOT personnel. On the Projects tab, you'll want to check and make sure your project has been assigned to you and is showing up in your project list. The Certifications tab will be your go-to tab on the dashboard and allows you to filter payrolls by contractor, assignments, meaning if they are a sub or more than one contractor, date range, payroll, number, status, and a few others. You can also click on the title of each column and sort that column by alphabetical order or reverse. The filtering feature is great for quickly identifying new payrolls that have come in, what payrolls may be in rejection status, and what payrolls are pending acceptance. Next, we have the Violations tab. If you have to reject a payroll, that rejection notice will need to explain what the issue is and how to resolve it. This tab lets you quickly filter outstanding violations that are pending and see the details. Reports. There are a variety of reports that can be accessed depending on the type of data you're looking for. All reports can be exported to Excel, which then allows for further filtering of data, or printed to a PDF. One of the more useful reports is the Enhanced Query Project Summary Report. This report includes everything there is to know from the system about a particular payroll system. It can be ran for all contractors, a specific contractor, or for a certain date range. It tracks the submission of payroll, when it was submitted or resubmitted, by whom, when it was approved, if it has been accepted, and displays all notices that have been issued for that payroll. Another report that you'll use frequently is the OJT report using demographics. This report accumulates the training hours spent by a trainee and should agree with the training hours reported on the monthly OJT Form 832, which we will discuss more in depth shortly. Another super handy report is the deductions report. Other deductions must be reported by type and amount to ensure that they are allowable deductions by USDOL on federal projects. This report is a quick way to identify deductions that may not be allowable or that require supporting documentation. The data can be filtered by contractor and/or date ranges, and it gives you the details of what deductions were reported. These are the same deductions that are reported on each certified payroll, just in a more consolidated view. For example, the first line here is an issue. The contractor listed other deductions totaling $146, but they only provided detailed information totaling $100 for child support. The question is, what is the other $46? The deduction attributed, other $46 deduction attributable to. Without being detailed by the contractor, the reviewer doesn't know and therefore cannot accept this payroll as being in compliance. This payroll would need to be rejected due to improper reporting of the other deductions. E-documents is where all of the supporting documents are housed. Here, both the contractor, subcontractors, local agencies, and CDOT can upload and view documentation. Here, you can also download document templates of CDOT forms. Some of the documents that may be uploaded include the CDOT fringe benefit form, child support, loan documents, cash advance agreements, owner-operator affidavits, union agreements, USDOL letters, and more. In view documents, you can filter by project, contractor, assignment, document type, date range, employee name. Also, you can click on the columns headers for further filtering. So let's go ahead and talk about the Davis-Bacon Act, which includes certified payrolls, additional wage classifications, and labor interviews. Contractors and subs covered by the Davis-Bacon are required to submit certified payrolls into LCPtracker within 7 days of the contractor's regular payment date. The prime contractor approves the payrolls and the local agency accepts the payrolls, but only after determining that the payrolls are in compliance. The Davis-Bacon Act says that all laborers and mechanics employed or working on the site of work of a Davis-Bacon covered project must be paid no less than the wage rate listed in the prevailing wage decision for the work they perform. Additional regulations that apply include Contract Work Hours and Safety Standard Act, known as QASA, which requires the payment of overtime for all hours worked over 40 hours in a week. And the Copeland Anti-Kickback Act that prohibits the kickback of wages by workers to contractors and requires contractors to submit weekly statements of compliance. It also establishes parameters for allowable and unallowable deductions that can be taken from an employee's paycheck that is subject to Davis-Bacon Act. Wage decisions establish the minimum required rate of pay for a specific project. They are established by regional areas, usually counties, and they are updated periodically based on wage surveys. A wage decision is locked in 10 days prior to the letting, which is the bid opening, and does not change for the life of the project, even if there's an update to the wage decision. And the reason is because contractors have to know what their cost of labor is when they are bidding a project. It can't be changing throughout the project. Agencies are responsible for ensuring that the right wage decision is included in the RFP, and that the wage decisions are posted on the project site so that workers will know what they are required to be paid. There are 4 construction types represented: residential, building, highway, and heavy. With highway, building, and heavy being the most common used on transportation projects, heavy is for projects that aren't classified as a building, residential, or highway, and is usually used for specialty projects like dredging, water, sewer lines, major bridges, or railroads. A project can have more than one type of wage decision. For example, a bridge will often have heavy for the bridge portion and highway for the roadway portions. Just a quick note, local prevailing wage requirements are still required to be updated every year. The key information on a wage decision includes the applicable state, construction type, date, wage decision number, modification number and date, applicable county or counties, and the cash and fringe rates that make up the minimum required rate. The total minimum required rate is the cash rate plus the fringe benefit rate. Let's look at an example. For the drill rig caisson example here, the cash rate is $31.05 and the fringe rate is $12.35 with a total minimum required rate of $43.30. The contractor can pay that minimum rate in one of 2 ways: all cash or a combination of cash and fringes. However, the cash rate must still at least meet the federal and or state minimum wage rate, whichever is higher. We also have to consider if there's any impact by federal, state, or local wage requirements. The current rates are in effect for 2023. The federal minimum wage rate is $7.25 an hour. The Colorado minimum wage rate is $13.65 an hour. And locally, the city and county of Denver wage rate, that is $17.29 per hour. Note that these are minimum cash wage rate requirements. So let's take a closer look at how these minimum cash requirements impacts projects with Davis-Bacon applicable. Davis-Bacon Act applies to laborers and mechanics of contractors, and subs are virtually adjacent to the site of work. And that includes those workers whose duties are manual or physical in nature, and whose tools or who are performing the work of a trade. Let's look at some other groups that often cause us to scratch our head when determining applicability of Davis-Bacon Act. Foreman. If a working foreman spends more than 20% of their time in a week during the manual work of a laborer or mechanic, then they must be paid the applicable prevailing wage. So often we hear that foremen are not subject to Davis-Bacon because they are salaried. To clarify, being salaried does not determine applicability, but rather the nature of the work and where it is performed. Someone who is salaried may still be subject to Davis-Bacon wages. Executives. Those are people who do not perform any work that is manual in nature, such as executives, administrative work, professionals that do not fall under the labor or mechanic category. Business owners. This is someone who owns at least a bona fide 20% equity interest in business and is involved in its management. They do not fall into the labor and mechanic category. CDOT has an owner-operator affidavit that must be completed to affirm this status on the payroll. While they are required to report themselves on the certified payroll, they do not have to report hours or actual wages. Certified payrolls are one of the highest risk areas in civil rights, mainly due to the high volume and frequency, as well as the difficulty often encountered determining what subs are on site and when for accurate reporting. Contractors are required to submit one certified payroll every week from the start of their work until completion of work, including no work weeks. So you can do the math on how quickly payrolls can pile up. Let's now look at the roles and responsibilities within the system. It all starts with both the prime contractor and subcontractors entering and certifying the data reported for each of their covered employees on a weekly basis. After submission, there are 2 levels of review for every single certified payroll. The prime contractor serves as the first level of review as the prime approver. CDOT requires each prime contractor to review the payroll submitted from all subs before approving. If the prime identifies an error with the payroll, they can send a notice to the sub requesting a correction. Once in compliance, the prime approves and the payroll is then submitted to the local agency. The local agency then reviews the payroll for compliance and either accepts or rejects it in the system. The Region Civil Rights Office then randomly selects payrolls to spot check the payroll data. If contractors are required to submit payrolls weekly, then the oversight should also be conducted weekly. Otherwise, an issue that is missed one week and not brought to the attention of the contractor timely could be repeated in the following week and have a compounding effect. Trust me, it's a lot more work for everyone to have to go back and correct multiple payrolls versus reviewing the payrolls in a timely manner, which should be weekly in this case. On the certifications tab, a weekly payroll is represented as a line item on the dashboard. In the approved column, you can see that the prime has approved payrolls and when. In the accept status column, you can see that the status of the local agency review. Filters can be used to quickly identify those payrolls that have not been accepted. What does it really mean to accept payrolls? So there's a difference between accepting a payroll and reviewing a payroll. The local agency must accept 100% of all payrolls approved by the prime in LCPtracker. But prior to accepting, the local agency should review the payrolls in detail. The local agency should review 100% of the first month of payroll submitted for each contractor. To accept the payroll, click the drop-down menu in accept status column and select accepted. If there are no issues with the payroll, reviews can be reduced to 10% of each contractor's payrolls submitted thereafter. For example, if 4 payrolls are submitted by a contractor within a month, the local agency must review at least 10%, which would be 1 of the 4 payrolls. For that 1 payroll, all workers reported should be reviewed. Regardless of how many payrolls have an in-depth review conducted, the local agency must always still accept 100% of the payrolls. If there are issues with the payrolls, the local agency should select rejected in the drop-down menu. The local agency should continue to review 100% of the payrolls until the issues are resolved and the contractor is in compliance. CDOT has a payroll review checklist online that tells you what you are tangibly looking for when reviewing the payrolls. We often get the question, do we have to fill this checklist out for every single payroll that we review and accept? The answer is no. This is just a guide to help you remember what you should look for when reviewing each payroll. And in time, you may not need to have it in front of you when you're checking each payroll. LCPtracker has a lot of checks and balances built in that does relieve the reviewer of many of the repetitive tasks, but there are still many checks that have to be done manually. For wage classifications, the project's prevailing wage decisions are loaded into the system. When submitting payrolls, that the contractor can only select a wage classification from the prevailing wage decision. The required rates are also entered. So when a wage classification is selected, the system checks to make sure the total paid at least meets the minimum required rate. If not, the system will not let the contractor submit their payroll. Mathematical accuracy. The system does check the mathematical accuracy of the information being entered, such as project gross wages, total deductions, and net wages. Statement of compliance. Each payroll requires a statement of compliance. While the system prompts the electronic signature in order to certify and submit, the information included in the statement itself must still be checked by the reviewer for accuracy. Deductions. The contractor is required to report other deductions by type and amount. LCPtracker uses a text field for this, which means the field cannot check for mathematical accuracy. The reviewer must do this to ensure that all deductions are reported by type and amount and equal to the total other deductions. Daily field activity. The daily field activity on the project should mirror the activity actually being reported on the certified payroll. Field reports are separate from LCP and will need to be manually reviewed and compared to the certified payrolls. Supporting documents. For supporting deduction documents, the system does not have a check to ensure that required supporting documents are uploaded prior to submission. This is the responsibility of the reviewer, and to know what documents are required, to check for the documents and to review them for accuracy before accepting a payroll. There's one exception to this. That is for the CDOT fringe benefit statement. The CDOT fringe benefit statement must be completed and uploaded into e-documents prior to the submission of the contractor's first payroll. The system is programmed to check that the document is uploaded. However, the system does not review the information for accuracy. The local agency reviewer must do this. The contractor fringe benefit statement is intended to determine how the contractor is paying its employees to meet the required minimum wage rates on the wage decision. Is that in cash only or a combination of cash and fringes? If fringe benefits are provided, then the contractor should complete the contractor fringe benefit declaration worksheet that supports the hourly fringe benefits reported on the face of the payroll. Additionally, the form continues to ask the contractor a series of questions regarding the type of fringe benefits provided to determine if they are bona fide fringe benefits, meaning they're allowable, and if they are unfunded or self-funded fringe benefit plans, because those plans require a USDOL approval letter that should be uploaded in e-documents. There are two parts of the certified weekly payroll: the statement of compliance and the wage and hour record. The statement of compliance says that the information reported is true, accurate, and in compliance with the regulations certified by a person with the authority to know that this information is accurate. One of the most frequently confusing items about the statement of compliance is Section 4. Remember, on a wage decision, the minimum required rate may include a cash component and a fringe component. The statement of compliance requires the contractor to communicate how fringes were paid to the reported workers. First, you need to determine if the reported wage classifications include a fringe requirement on the wage decision. If it doesn't, then no boxes should be marked in Section 4. If it does, then the contractor needs to tell you how the fringes are being paid. If the fringes were only paid into a bona fide fringe benefit plan, then box 4A should be marked. If the fringes were only paid in cash, then box 4B should be marked. However, if the fringes were paid to workers in a combination of cash and bona fide fringe benefits, it is acceptable by CDOT for both 4A and 4B to be marked. Any exceptions to these scenarios should be reported in item 4C. Exceptions in box 4C, exceptions, and further explained. The wage and hour record is the report of the workers active on the project, their hours and the amounts paid. A payroll may have multiple lines, at least one for each worker that is being reported for each wage classification worked. For payrolls that are reviewed in detail, all lines of the payrolls should be reviewed. Let's look at the information for a reported employee. It reports the employee's name, an employee ID number, which can be the last four of the social security number, the wage classification, and the wage decision being reported in compliance with. Hours are only reported for the subject project. Hours worked on other projects are not reported. The hours are reported by straight time and overtime for hours worked over 40 and totaled for the week. Under the gross amount earned, you'll find the total for this project only. That equals the total hours worked for this project multiplied by the rate of pay for straight time and or overtime. All projects represents the total paid for all projects that the employee worked on during this week and should agree with the gross wages on the employee's pay stub. Rate in lieu of fringe is an additional cash payment that were made above the base rate in order to meet the total minimum wage rate requirement. Say that 3 times fast. Wage rate requirement. Every time I want to stumble all over. The next section is taxes and deductions. Key areas reported include base taxes and the net wages. In other deduction notes, other deductions are required to be reported by type and amount. In this case, the contractor has reported health insurance of $52.69 and a vision insurance of 98 cents, totaling $53.67, which is also what is reported in the total other box. This is correct, and the health and vision are both allowable deductions that do not require an additional approval by USDOL. The contractor also reports the payroll payment date. Reminder that contractors are required to pay no less than weekly. Contractors report on the CDOT fringe benefit statement what their pay period is and what day of the week they pay. A payment more than 7 days after the weekend may be an indicator that the contractor is not paying weekly and should be investigated. Let's look at how fringe benefits work. In this example, the employee is classified as a forklift operator. The wage decision requires a payment of $21 in cash and $8.67 in fringe benefits for a total minimum required rate of $29.67. Reminder that the contractor can meet this minimum required rate by paying the entire amount in cash or a combination of cash and fringes. The contractor is paying a total of $29.67. That consists of an hourly base rate of $26 and $3.59 in fringe benefits and an additional 8 cents an hour in cash called rate in lieu of fringe to meet the required minimum on this federal project. The hourly fringe benefit amounts reported are supported by the calculations submitted by the contractor on the contractor fringe benefit declaration worksheet. All right, additional wage classification request. If the project's prevailing wage decision does not have a classification that is needed by the contractor or a sub, the prime should submit a form 1444 to the local agency, who then forwards it to CRBRC and copies Region Civil Rights. CRBRC will send it to USDOL for further processing. While being processed, the requested classification and rate will be entered into LCPtracker by the CRBRC and can be used by the contractor as a presumptive wage rate. If the conformed rate is higher than the requested rate, wage restitution must be paid to all the affected workers. Labor interviews are required to be conducted by the local agency to spot check the accuracy of information being reported by the contractors on certified payroll and are documented on the CDOT Form 280. CDOT Spec 107 includes the chart shown here that guides the number of labor interviews that must be conducted based on the original contract amount. Labor interviews are confidential. The employee should feel that they can be honest with their answers and therefore should not be conducted in front of another employee or a supervisor. Even if language is a barrier, you can always use an interpretation app on your phone. The first section of the labor interview form asks a series of questions to determine the contractor's compliance with the EEO provisions, such as, have they implemented an EEO policy, appointed an EEO officer, and disseminated the information of their policy to their employees. If the employee's responses indicate that the company has not shared their EEO information, then those concerns can be pointed out to the contractor. But the specifics of the interview should not be shared with the contractor because, again, labor interviews are confidential. For example, if the employee states that they do not know who the EEO officer is, then it could be communicated with the contractor that the labor interviews indicated that additional efforts should be taken by the company to ensure that employees know who the EEO officer was during periodic employee meetings. If multiple EEO issues arise out of the labor interview, then the region civil rights office should be contacted. The next section covers labor compliance. If the employee states that they are not paid at least weekly, then the region civil rights office should be contacted for further investigation. Ultimately, if the contractor is not in compliance with required pay frequency, then they will be required to take actions to modify their payroll frequency and to be brought into compliance immediately. Additionally, the interviewer should be cognizant of the purpose of the labor interview. The description of work documented should be detailed enough to correlate it with wage classifications on the wage decision. If not, the interviewer may need to dig a little deeper in the interview to obtain better information. Many times the interviewer is not the same person completing the verification section and comparing the interview to the certified payroll. And don't forget to have the employee sign and date. In the verification section, the labor interview is compared to the certified payroll to determine that the worker was reported in the correct wage classification for the work being performed and paid at least the minimum wage required rate for that classification. It is important that the interview sign and date the interview at the bottom of this section so that you know who to ask if there are any questions about the interview, as well as what date on the payroll to compare the interview to. Once the labor interview has been conducted, documented, and any issues resolved, the Form 280 should be uploaded into LCPtracker and filed in the cabinet for labor interview forms. This is a confidential cabinet within LCP that the contractor cannot access. All right, OJT. Let's talk about OJT. OJT requirements include the OJT goal, the contractor's commitment to the goal, enrollment of trainees, and the trainee status and tracking. The OJT goal for the project is established by the Region Civil Rights Office. So, for example, this project has a 5,000 hour goal. The contractor's commitment to meet the OJT goal for this project is outlined in Form 1337. Here the contractor is communicating the OJT program that will be used. Provides details on the training classifications and the expected number of hours for each in order to reach the goal. It also includes a certification statement of the prime contractor's commitment to meet this contractual requirement. The contractor emails the Form 1337 to the local agency, who then forwards it into the Region Civil Rights Office. The region will then review and determine that the commitment will meet the goal and then upload it into LCPtracker into the document cabinet for the Form 1337. OJT trainees are requested by the contractor on a Form 838 for enrollment and approval by CDOT. The form is emailed by the contractor to the local agency, who then forwards to the Region Civil Rights Office. The region will review and determine if a training classification is available in LCPtracker and set it up if not. Wage codes for apprentices or trainees are set up in LCPtracker and denoted by 2 X's in the front and the acronym ATW for apprentice trainee wage. Some key areas of the 838 include the training program that is being used, the type of previous construction experience that the trainee has, because it defeats the purpose of the program to enroll a trainee that already has served in a journeyman role for the type of work to be trained in. This must be determined at the time of enrollment. The employing contractor and region civil rights manager all sign the form. The contractor indicates the level that the trainee is at depending on the type of program used and the number of accumulated training hours. This information should agree with the program or union documentation and establishes the training rate that is set up in LCPtracker. As apprentices increase in steps, a revised Form 838 will need to be submitted and approved to ensure the proper wage classification is set up for the increased training level. If the training program is a union program, then a Bureau of Apprenticeship Training, we call it a BAT, certificate should be submitted along with the 838 to evidence the trainee's enrollment, acknowledgement by the union. Once approved, the region uploads the 838 into LCPtracker, e-documents in the Form 838 cabinet. Monthly, the training hours for each trainee are reported on a Form 832 that is emailed to the local agency for review and approval. Approved hours are counted towards the project's OJT goal. The approved Form 832 is loaded into LCPtracker by the local agency in the Form 832 cabinet. Only the hours trained on the subject project can be counted towards the OJT goal. The OJT demographics report in LCPtracker, previously mentioned, can be used to verify the hours reported on the 832, as this information comes directly from the certified payrolls. Training should be reported in the appropriate training classification on the payrolls. The report shows all work that the trainee performed, which may be in the trainee role as well as a journeyman role for a different skill set. Only the training hours should be reported on the Form 832. Form 832 is signed monthly by the trainee, the contractor, and the local agency project engineer. The local agency should also maintain an ongoing tracking of the trainee's hours accumulated each month to keep an awareness of the contractor's progress towards meeting the goal. An Excel spreadsheet can be used for this, as in the example shown here. All right, moving on to EEO, Equal Employment Opportunity, and the reporting requirements. So what these include are the job site bulletin board, July reports, the 1391s, and the contractor compliance reviews. Job sites must have a bulletin board containing the EEO policy, wage decisions, and other posters that are required by federal and state regulations, as well as the contract. Due to Colorado's large Spanish-speaking population, applicable posters in Spanish are required. The bulletin board must be posted within the project limits, accessible to the public at all times, and installed on or before the first day that work begins. And posters should be regularly monitored to make sure that they are at readable height, legible, and that no posters are missing or faded. All posters should be laid flat on the board so that they are readable. You can find all required posters as well as the job site bulletin board checklist on the CDOT website. The checklist provides a detailed view of the pictures for ease of identification when conducting the board inspections. Once completed and the board is determined to be in compliance, the inspection documentation should be uploaded into LCPtracker in the cabinet for job site bulletin boards within e-documents. July reporting provides a survey nationwide of construction workers on the job sites in July. Monitoring reports for these requirements are also housed within LCP and generated from the certified payroll. The report is based on the contractor's last fully active week in July. Contractors must report any additional administrative staff that was dedicated to the project on the certification within LCP and certify it. The reporting information is accessed directly by CDOT headquarters from the system for reporting. The contractor is also required to comply with the EEO and non-discrimination provisions of FHWA 1273. Region Civil Rights Office periodically conducts contractor compliance reviews and will notify the local agency if a contractor from one of their projects has been selected for a review. The local agency assistance may be requested. Some of the documents that are used in this review are housed in LCPtracker. All right, so here we are for some CDOT resources and tools. Where can you find out more information? So CDOT has so many resources and tools available at your fingertips. Under the Civil Rights Compliance area, there are links to both B2GNow and LCPtracker on how to get started with both of these systems. And did you know that CDOT CRBRC has their own YouTube channel that houses lots of training videos? Lots. There are B2GNow user guides available on the CDOT website, as well as LCPtracker user guides. Also, CDOT's Connect to DOT Center has a portal of trainings and events offered, and you can also access previously recorded webinars. And that's a wrap. Needless to say, we've covered a lot of territory today. And as you've seen, there's really a lot to fully learning these programs, and we totally get it. We definitely can't teach you everything there is to know in 2 hours today, but we are off to a very good start.